Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's WEConnect International webinar. My name is Maggie Berry. I'm the Executive Director for WEConnect International here in Europe, and I'm delighted that you have joined us for today's WEConnect International webinar, which is a basic guide to facilitating meetings and delivering presentations online. Our presenter today is Jackie Black, a Communication Skills Consultant and the Director of Digital Business Communication Limited, a WEConnect International Certified Business Enterprise. Jackie will be sharing a short overview of some of the different commercial platforms available for online sessions, as well as the basic steps that you need to take when setting up virtual meetings or presentations like this. She'll share some of the practical do's and don'ts in terms of delivery online, including dealing with things like nerves, using your voice effectively, and also the impact of non-verbal communication. To keep background noise to minimum, could I please ask you all to keep yourselves on mute? So please do use the chat functionality if you have any questions, and there will be time for Q&A at the end. Jackie's probably going to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes. And then there will be, the session is being recorded, so you can listen back and you will be able to get a copy of the slides. So, Jackie, I am going to find you and hand over the presenter rights to you. So just bear with me 1 second. Thank you. And I'm going to make you the presenter, so the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thanks, Maggie, and welcome. Have I got it? Yeah, lovely. Good. So as Maggie said, today is really a basic guide because there are quite a few people that I've come across anyway who don't really feel that confident in setting up online training and meetings and probably don't have that much experience or time to investigate the different platforms out there either. Perhaps they're just using their own personal Skype account at the moment. So firstly, I will say I am not an IT specialist. I have actually, I suppose, taught myself over the years. I've been doing this type of thing for about 7 or 8 years now, mostly working with non-native speakers of English who want to communicate globally with their companies and who needed to know how to facilitate meetings or deliver presentations more effectively in terms of not only the language but the culture and the non-verbal communication. So let's have a quick look at the agenda. It can be quite slow to load, so there's a point always to remember. Don't panic when you click the forward button and nothing happens on the screen, because it does take a few seconds to feed through. So first we'll look at different platforms that I think are the most useful for you as professional women, and a quick look at the functionality of 2 or 3. Then just a few screenshots for step-by-step setup guides, because you can download really comprehensive tutorials for the relevant platforms anyway. We'll move on to the do's and don'ts of facilitating virtual meetings, how to engage people in virtual presentations, because not seeing people or having that distance between you can make engagement a whole lot more difficult. Then a very quick few tips on how to feel more confident when you're delivering, using your voice, and then, as Maggie said, the non-verbal communication, which I suppose is more relevant if you're going to deliver webinars with camera or if you're going to use the platforms for training too. And finally, just a roundup of top tips that I hope you can take away with you. Please feel free to write things in the chat if something arises that you'd like me to address at that time. Otherwise, we will have time at the end for questions, so you can also put those in the chat and Maggie will store them up, if that's okay. Hopefully I'm not speaking too quickly for you. So, just a few, oops, it's gone too far. There we go. a few of the main platforms out there, commercial ones. Obviously today we're using Cisco WebEx. I will say that is one of the more expensive platforms, but the functionality is so much better, I think. It's a much more sophisticated platform, and if you're considering working in a virtual team on a regular basis, so you need to be sharing meeting information, project information, you don't have another means of doing that, then Cisco WebEx is very good because you can upload and share files and information which then stay on the platform with the relevant meetings. So it is good for that type of thing. Skype for Business, if you already have Microsoft 365, then you have the basic package of Skype for Business in there, which means, you know, logically that's your chosen platform. It's good because you can book your meetings through your Outlook calendar. It's very easy to do that, and it's a simple platform to use. Very similar to the ordinary Skype, but just that you can add in more people to your meetings, and it just looks more professional too, I think. GoToMeeting, I think somebody was asking about training online, and this is one that I have worked with a training company on, and I think that is a good platform for that particular way of working, because you can upload training documents and create, for example, tasks and activities for the groups or your students to do offline. Again, it's quite expensive, so you'd have to consider the pros and cons there. WEConnect, another quite common platform, very similar to WebEx, but a bit cheaper, I think, has very similar functionalities. Moving down to the bottom, we have Google Hangouts, and that's just a reminder that if you are a Google fan and you use Gmail, then Hangouts is there for free anyway, and some people do use that for less formal meetings anyway. Moving on, Zoom. Zoom seems to be very popular in the US, and I've used it. I've been invited to meetings on it, and it's very simple, so it's one of the ones I'm going to quickly run through with you in more detail. You can get the basic package for free, or you can upgrade, obviously, like many of these platforms, and get more functionality. And finally, Webinar Jam. Now this is, as the name says, probably more useful for those who want to do webinars more often. Not really sure on the pricing strategy. When you go online and have a look at it, they're very quick on the commercial side to jump in and try to drag you in. I have a feeling you can negotiate price on that, but it is all singing, all dancing, very lively, lots of interactive tools. So for webinar delivery, seems to be a really good choice. Okay. But I think it's up to you, obviously, to choose. And these are just a few of the questions that I would put to you. There's no point spending a lot of money on something if you're only going to be using it very infrequently. Maybe you're just going to be invited by others who've paid for a platform and sharing or downloading a link from them, in which case you don't really need to invest in something very sophisticated. As I already said, if you have software like Microsoft, it's worth thinking, is Skype for Business sufficient for me? What do you actually need in terms of tools? Do you want to be able to poll people, use a lot of interactive tools to keep people engaged, or is it purely for a business meeting where you want to upload some slides and run through them together? So very important. Some of the more sophisticated platforms like Cisco WebEx have, for example, breakout rooms. So you can invite small groups of people to go into the breakout rooms and have their own mini discussions and then come back in and join you. So, you know, that's something that is probably not necessary for most people on this call, but it's a really useful tool if you're on a team building session or something like that. What's your budget? Of course, very important question. Don't forget, it's quite easy to ask for a free trial on all of those. It's just a matter of being forthcoming, I think, forthright, sorry, not forthcoming, because I've got a free trial of GoToMeeting coming up in the next week or two, and they're only too happy to show you how it's used as well. And then finally, of course, how confident are you? If you are a technophobe, then sticking to simple ones like Zoom, which really, you know, it's very little chance of anything major going wrong. Until you get more confident and more able to use the tools, then sticking to something very simple and basic is my recommendation anyway. Okay, so I've just done a screenshot of the setup for Zoom, I suppose, to prove to you how easy it is. So you just obviously download the app, create yourself a sign-up registered account for free, obviously. Then when you sign in, this first screen comes up and the choice is yours. Scheduling a meeting ahead of time, you would obviously click the camera, and I'll show you what happens with that in a moment. Or you could just start immediately. You know, if you've already decided with somebody that you want to have an impromptu meeting, it's simple, just click the camera or start without video, obvious, okay? If you need to share files, then click the button, share screen. Really, really simple. So my next screen grab then is, I've clicked schedule a meeting, and it's so intuitive. Obviously use the drop down boxes to choose the date, how long you want it to run. Some of these platforms, if you overrun, they will cut off. So it's better to put in a longer time schedule than you really need so that you don't get cut off at the last minute. You can check the time zones, obviously, if you're working internationally. And then choose, and you have control of whether the other people use the video or not. So you've got yourself on, and I've got the participants off. And of course, you've got the other options of audio and computer there. Click on to calendar to book it into your own, whichever calendar you're using, and then click schedule. Absolutely simple. It then sends a link to the person that you're wanting to book the meeting with on the next page when you go through, which sadly I forgot to put on. They then click that meeting link on the appropriate time and can join you very, very easily. Okay, so then I went from the simple intuitive one to WebEx here. Now probably you've all done this anyway because you've followed the link to join in now. But if you have a WebEx account, again there are two ways of doing it. If it's something impromptu, you can go into your account and there is a simple button, Start Meeting Now, which is, if you can see my cursor here. So you can click and just choose the email address of the person you want to call and then click the start button. Very, very simple. However, if you're booking to a meeting ahead of time. Where there are more people, then you need to schedule the meeting, and this would come up. You can give it a name. You add in the email addresses down the side on the invitation. You can upload the slides ahead of time so people can see them. And on this one, if, for example, the meeting had already started and you realized that someone had been forgotten, or you needed the advice or input from someone who's not in the meeting, you can quickly invite them with this Who's Invited section here on the right-hand side. And if they're available, of course, then they can join the meeting immediately. This platform allows you then to chat with people before the meeting within this schedule, asking them perhaps to carry out tasks or to comment on documents that you're going to discuss in the meeting. So this is how it's more sophisticated than Zoom, for example. Okay, so you've got your platform. Now we need to think about the peripherals, and I really do recommend that you take time to look at getting a good headset. I started off years ago with my cheap Tesco's bog standard version, and I really didn't know how different it was to having the one I have today, which is a Jabra Evolve. Why is it different? This one really reduces the noise that's around you on the outside, ensures that it's also not a distraction to the listeners. Of course, the microphone is better, and these are Bluetooth, so you can either plug them into your computer to make sure that the battery doesn't run out, but as long as you've charged them up well beforehand, it means that you can do a lot of walking about. You can present standing up, which is a really good idea. And of course, they do look more professional when you're online and people see you in the camera. I got mine. This is a big shout out for Julie Watling from Communication Solutions, another WEConnect certified member. She went through my needs with me really carefully and advised me on what to buy. I paid the price and my headset arrived really quickly. Her service is really good and she understands what you need, because obviously there's a great range of different products out there. So I strongly recommend that if you haven't got a decent headset, think about that. Okay, the next consideration really is, do you use your video or not? Are you going to only go audio? I would recommend normally that you use your camera, especially of course in meetings. I'm amazed how many big corporates don't use the camera. They come up with excuses like, oh, well, no, because nobody wants to, nobody feels comfortable, some people haven't got good cameras, etc. But they are so important for building relationships, especially if it's a new client that you're about to start work with, or a team that you don't know all the individuals. The trust factor comes from being able to see you and really understand you as a person, and it's much harder to do that if you're not using a camera. Okay, you can, because you can use your chat, you can email, you can phone each other, but that all takes time, and the camera will cut out a lot of that time. Also, of course, there's a lot less chance of people misunderstanding each other. If you've got the camera on, you can actually read people's faces, see if you've said something wrong, correct things more quickly than if you're trying to guess by just using audio. people are engaged more, I think, especially if they are forced to switch on the camera. It means they can't really sit and do other things while they're involved in the meeting or presentation. And so for anyone who's thinking of training online, I think it also makes you more present as a trainer, and there's a connection between you and your students and what you're trying to deliver, of course. And then, of course, the question of using the microphone on mute. Protocol says that, as we did today, when you join a meeting, it's far better to have everyone on mute, just to keep the distraction levels down. And as a facilitator, to have that control over choosing whether your participants are on mute or not is really good, because everybody, you know, likes to put in their 2 penneth worth in a meeting, and if there's a particularly dominant speaker in a very big group of people, being able to mute people from the beginning and then allow them to speak can make your life much easier, and the lives of those who are perhaps a little bit shyer and find it more difficult to interrupt or to say their piece. But I think the big question is, does that create any disengagement? If you're on mute, which I've been myself many times, sometimes you just feel you're not 100% part of the proceedings. So that is something that you have to think about yourselves, really, according to the context. So let's move on to actually facilitating. I'm really sorry that there's lots and lots of content on this slide. It's very dense. I had actually set them up as animations to appear one after the other, but something that Maggie and I realized, and is really important for you to know too, if you use WebEx, it doesn't allow you to do that with your slides. It will always show everything that you've put on immediately. So I kind of messed up here, and I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to read it all out, but these are just some of the key points for you to bear in mind when you are facilitating. Obviously, sending out the invites well ahead of time with your agenda, good idea. And as Maggie did, sending a reminder the day before, just for those who have a really busy calendar, because it also will resend the link, and it saves people having to scroll back through emails and things to find out how to join. A lot of people don't think about this, but finding a quiet space is really important. Making sure there won't be any distractions, people coming in and out. I think the best example was the newsreader, wasn't he, in Russia, where his kids came crawling into the room and then his wife had to fly in and grab them out. So especially if you're working at home, checking that nobody's going to interrupt you, including couriers, postmen, whatever. And check the background. What's behind you? What will people see? Will it distract them? Does it look strange? Is there too much light coming into your room? Those type of things. Then, of course, it's making sure that everything that you've plugged in is working properly. So you always need to spend a good few minutes checking that you haven't switched off the sound on your microphone, that the camera works, etc. And somebody asked, what do you do when it all goes wrong? We'll go back into that in more detail a little bit later. But I find if you're using something like Skype, then you could have that on your phone, you could have it on a tablet, any type of backup device that will allow you to switch from one to the other is quite a good idea. You need to upload your slide decks well beforehand and just have a quick practice looking at all the tools. How do you move them forward and backwards? Different platforms have different mechanisms here. So it's worth checking, especially if you're invited to use someone else's platform. I also think it's important to establish ground rules with your participants at the kickoff. You can put it under the heading of housekeeping, but it's things like using mute. It's about using names too when you speak. Because if there is a very big group of people and you're only on audio, it can be very hard to identify where the voice is coming from, who it belongs to. It's about netiquette, I suppose, the polite side of working online, how you will go around the table, for example, as an introduction. Always good to have a timekeeper too, but if you're going to record the meeting, you don't really need a minute taker. Recording is great because, as Maggie said, you can upload it directly after the meeting with a link, and everybody can access it again, or those who couldn't attend, of course. Quick technical hitch here. Okay, so my don'ts then. It might sound a bit strange, but don't invite too many people. Some of these platforms have limited numbers anyway, according to what you're paying for. Generally around 25 people, but some could be much less, especially if you're just using basic things like Zoom, the free one, or Google Hangouts. It's perhaps 3 to 4 other people. And small talk, really important, especially while you're waiting for people to log in, because if people are left hanging around for others to join, they very soon will get distracted, start going back to checking their emails, sending texts and stuff. So small talk will keep them engaged, it will set the tone of the meeting, and of course it's really good for building the rapport between the different members of the meeting. Try not to read your slides. I know I'm doing it a little bit today because it is so boring, and I've attended so many online presentations where people just read every single bullet and they tend to become very monotone while they're doing it. The other thing, of course, is how do you work with those dominant people who want to keep talking, hear their own voice? That is something you need to lay down in your best practice. You as the facilitator obviously need to monitor it, and that may mean that you become far more forceful than you would do in a face-to-face meeting. You need to step in and ask that person to let someone else speak. And it can be quite difficult, not only because you don't want to make them feel awkward, but if you're not using the camera, it's really tricky. You can't see them, you can't catch their eye and sort of distract them like that. It means you have to be pretty forceful in a nice way. Clarifying and reformulating what people have said also in a virtual meeting is really, really important. Again, because we're all people in the cloud, we're all faceless, it can be that we forget who said what. It could be that somebody speaks for quite a long time, and by the time they finished, you can't remember what they said at the beginning. So as a facilitator, it's your job to keep summarizing regularly and allow people then to be able to make changes, disagree, or correct you on what they think they said. And finally, it's great to be able to use the tools available to you. We can see, I don't know if you actually can see on my screen here, but there are annotation tools. So you could put up slides and ask the audience to annotate. You give them permission, they click on to the tool, and they can actually participate. So if you had a list of figures and somebody was wanting to question them, you could give them the tool and allow them to circle those particular figures to make it really clear to others what they're talking about, rather than having to explain over and over or be very, very precise about what you're talking about. So I've already mentioned this, but for me, best practices for virtual meetings is an absolute must, especially if you are working with a regular team. It just makes everyone's life much easier. If you have a chance to sit down with those you regularly communicate with and come up with some agreed practices and then put them in writing, keep them somewhere that everyone can refer to them, whether it's on the intranet, whether it's on a shared platform somewhere else that you're using for team meetings. The benefits, as you can see, they're much smarter. You don't waste as much time. You can be sure that all your objectives are met, and people aren't left thinking, well, that was another wasted half hour I didn't need to attend. Also, following those protocols will allow you to keep conflict to a minimum, I think. Conflict in the sense of knowing when to argue, knowing how to interrupt each other without letting emotions become too involved. So that goes back to expressing how you feel in words, because when the camera's switched off, if you're really annoyed about something, yes, we can hear it in your voice, but not always. Some people are very good at disguising that. So it's really a good idea to let everybody have permission within those best practices. Give people permission to say how they feel without upsetting anybody else. I hope that makes sense. It's also easier to facilitate when you use, for example, roll calls and names on a regular basis. So the considerations I have here, obviously the welcome. Again, we've talked about small talk. Using names, it feels really strange at the beginning, but if you always begin by using your name, so Jackie here, I just wanted to say X, Y, and Z, and the other person then replies using their name, it just makes things so much easier. The same when you want to ask somebody a question, so you have to obviously name them because it's not going to be clear who you're directing your question to. Keep your speech clear and language simple. There's no need to have very great complex sentences. It just gets lost in space, I think. Also, it's very important to monitor the tone of your voice and the speed, the pace at which you speak. After 30, 40 minutes as a meeting facilitator, if you are the main contributor, your voice will get tired and become rather dull and perhaps not the best for keeping the rest of the team motivated. Silence, also really important. I think British, at least, have a tendency to feel very uncomfortable with silence. We fill it with blah, blah, blah. But of course, we need silence as a time to reflect on what's been said and on what we want to say in response. So we need to factor that into discussions. And again, when you haven't got the camera on and you can't see that people are thinking about your question, you need to be much more patient and allow that silence. Turn taking, also really important. We've touched on it a little bit with the dominant speaker, but yes, the facilitator needs to make sure that all those who are less vociferous have the opportunity to speak, and that everyone has a chance to give their opinion during the meeting. Nothing worse than leaving without having had the chance to say what you wanted to say. And when we can't see you, we have a tendency to forget you. So moving on then very quickly to presentations. Key thing here, of course, is, again, being virtual. If you're not using a camera, keeping people engaged is going to be one of your biggest challenges. And I just put up a few notes here. I think the 4 Ps are a great way of keeping on track with your presentation. So the first one, preparation. At the beginning, when you're preparing your slides, obviously take into consideration the platform you're going to use, what it will offer to you, what you're going to put on the slides, what you're not. And this is really important because you need to keep, I think, visuals far more than writing on the slides. Obviously, practice. Think about how you're going to deliver. Are you going to stand? Are you going to sit? And try, if possible, to get feedback from a colleague or a close friend who will be honest with you about how well it's gone. Purpose, really good to think, rather than just all about the content, what exactly are you trying to do with this presentation? Is it just to inform people? Do you want to get their opinions from it? Are you teaching them something, giving advice? And that will impact on the process, which is obviously how much interaction you want to take place and the way you present those slides. Finally, people, what do they already know? What are they expecting from you as the presenter? And what do they need in terms of delivery? Are they very visual people? Will they react well to lots of memorable slides? Or do they need to be able to join in and voice their opinions? I flipped this slide in because somebody asked what happens when it all goes wrong. I think the key really is don't panic. I have panicked so many times. You haven't broken anything. It's most likely the connectivity. So the first thing to do, if you can, is to tell people that you're going to log off and then come back in again. Very often that will resolve everything. If it doesn't and you're finding that it's not very stable, that you've got poor sound quality, etc., try switching off the camera because obviously that's using up quite a lot of the bandwidth and it may work better. Also check that you haven't got lots of other things open on your laptop or computer. Have another device ready or try another platform. I always default to my personal Skype account if everything else is not working because normally or the majority of people can do that too, and it's just there as a backup. So how do you become more confident? I think a lot of it's to do with being prepared, knowing what you're going to speak about, practicing, especially the timing. checking that you're not going over time, because that's one sure way of disengaging people. If you're having problems with the speaking because you're so nervous you can hardly breathe, there are lots of breathing exercises you can find online. The one I like is the 4-7-8, which means that you inhale for 4, you hold it for 7, and you exhale for 8. You can look that one up on the internet. It just slows you down, fills your lungs with air so that you have good quality air. You're not shallow breathing, and it can be a really good way to calm you just before you start. Also, imagine success. Think of a time when you did something really well and that you know you can do it. It's a simple NLP type exercise, but really one worth thinking about. It makes a heck of a lot of difference to how you feel. But connecting with the audience from the beginning with an anecdote or a little story of something that happened just before you came online can work very well. Think about your audience, what they're thinking, what they're doing, rather than yourself. And of course, act confident. If you are on camera, it's really important that you keep smiling and that you have good posture. For voice, just a couple of tips. Obviously, the tone and tempo we've covered, but it's good to think about which are the key words in your message that you want to emphasize, like I did, the key words. Use silence and pauses for effect, lets people time to think, but be careful to articulate well. Across the internet, you can get distortion of your voice. So if you're a mumbler, you need to really think about articulation. As I said before, it's a really good idea to stand if you can. I watched a webinar the other day and I was fascinated by how good the presenter was, but I couldn't work out what was different until I realized that she had one of those desks that can rise up and down to allow you to work at them standing. So she had her laptop at eye level, and it does make such a difference, I think, to the energy and the enthusiasm. Okay, some quite interesting facts here about engagement. If you are not using a camera and you're perhaps not such a good presenter, it's more than likely people will start multitasking, doing other things. They're busy. Maybe they don't feel that your input is that interesting to them and they've got other things to do. Worse still, when you can't see them, they may just stick you on mute and disappear off to make a cup of tea or have a chat and come back when they think that something more interesting is going to come on. Some of the platforms, like Adobe Connect, have this strange little engageometer, I suppose, which can monitor how much interest is being generated by the audience. And although it's quite off-putting at the beginning because you can see it going blue when they're dropping off and red when they're excited, it can be a really good instrument to make you aware of what's going on. But what you need really is a hook, something to draw them in and keep them interested. And mostly that's to do with telling stories and building that rapport, sharing personal things with people and keeping your text to a minimum. Think about uploading videos instead, if that's relevant. And of course, images which really tell that story for you. If you can dig up some remarkable or surprising or shock tactic facts, that's usually a really good one. And of course, using rhetorical questions as well as questions to the audience will keep people on their toes. They never quite know whether you're going to be asking them something or not. And audience interaction, which is about using those tools that we have here, which I'm going to do next. So what tools do you have available? Polls. Polls are great, especially at the beginning of a presentation or a webinar. You can create a poll beforehand. Perhaps it has a question and 3 answers. And then during your presentation, you press launch, and it will appear on the screen of the audience, and they click a button to choose their response. When you've given them a little bit of time to think about it, you can close the poll, and then the results will appear on your screen, and you can go through them. You can also just put in a blank slide and get people to type in things for you, or use the pencil if they're good at it. The raised hand allows them to vote on questions that you ask them. And if you're really, really confident, you can actually hand over the microphone to people in the audience, unmute them and allow them to make comments, which can be really good too. Time is really running out, I can see. So this is the last slide, just a summary really of top tips for presentations. Firstly, it's all about the audience and your delivery, choosing the right language, keeping people engaged, and monitoring your non-verbal communication. We didn't actually touch much on this today, but it's all about the body language if you have the camera on, the smiling, the confident look, and not waving your hands around too much while you're speaking, and definitely not having any distracting items like clicking pens. And finally, just practice and get feedback from somebody. Okay, so that's it. I'm open to questions if you have any.
Jackie, thank you so much. You've covered a lot of ground and shared some really useful tips. I just have a couple of questions to start with. Okay. What kind of price point are we talking about for some of these different systems? Do you have any kind of ballpark figures for people about what, I don't know, what is, you can pay, from free to, I mean, I know for us here at WeConnect International, I think we pay about £35 a month for the use of WebEx.
Do you? That's quite good, because when I checked it out online, it's up to about 69. So perhaps you've managed to negotiate a good deal. Zoom, if you don't have the free version, is between 15 and 30. So I think after free, it begins at about £15 upwards, and the most expensive is going to be this 69. Which seems to be the commercial price point when you just go in as an individual and have a look. Okay. Ah, right, I need the questions, don't I? So let's have a look at the chat.
So I also know that we have then within Outlook things like Skype for Business and everything like that, which is all part of the package. And then I just have one more thing. I think you touched on it briefly. Do you have any best practice when you've got a mixed group? So some people in the room and some people on a call?
Yes, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Well, obviously, those in the room, it's all about seating so that everybody can be seen. I've often had, say, a group of 3 people, and one of them's half off the camera, which can be really irritating anyway. So it's about setting up the seating, clear understanding of who will speak when, I suppose. And if it's only one person remote, I think you need to spend that extra bit of time making them feel more comfortable at the other end, because it can be a little bit nerve-wracking if it's 3 to 1, for example. So that extra small talk and maybe introducing the 3 in the other room.
Yeah, okay. I just know that that's quite a common scenario when we've got some people who can make it face to face, and then others are dialing in. It's like, how do you keep remembering to go back to them when they're just the spider phone in the middle of, when they're just the spider phone in the middle of the room. So I don't know if anybody has any further questions for Jackie, please do use the chat functionality. Victoria, I know that you've just asked a question which has come through to me directly about a banking demo, but I haven't quite understood it yet. So I don't know if you could provide any more information maybe in the, actually if I find you on the list, maybe I can unmute you and you could ask your question. Victoria, I've just unmuted me. Do you want to ask your question to Jackie about the banking demo?
Hi.
The baking demo. Baking demo.
Baking.
Sorry. Oh, you just put yourself back on mute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yes. So if I went to use the free one, you said some of them are limited to maybe 3 or 4 people while I'm live. But then if it's recorded, I presume it would record. Can I then share that demonstration, as it were, on my Facebook? Or is it's just as easy to do a Facebook Live?
You're very, very quiet. I think I heard everything. So you're talking about uploading the recording onto Facebook, was that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And sharing it, rather than using Facebook Live.
Would it be any better, or is there no point?
I mean, probably no point. If you're using Facebook Live and you're happy with that, and it's appropriate for, in terms of formality and professionalism, then yeah, you might as well just do that. But it really depends who you're working with, doesn't it? And whether you might want to share that recording with somebody else later.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant, thanks, Victoria. I mean, I know for us, when we use WebEx, the recording, it comes out as a WebEx file, but we'll then convert it and upload it onto our YouTube channel, and then it's there for everybody to watch afterwards. And that's one of the recordings then become part of our toolkit that people can listen back to at any point in the future. If they weren't able to join live today, they can listen back to it. So we, as an organisation, we do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And of course, it can, once you've uploaded it, you'd have to save it, because I think they're not stored for that long, are they, on WebEx? They disappear.
WebEx has a kind of a storage amount, and when you hit your storage amount, you can't record anymore. But once they're uploaded onto YouTube, you don't.
Yeah, I don't
need to use this.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions for Jackie? I don't know if anybody's messaged you directly on the chat function. I haven't
seen any. No.
No, and I don't have any more here. And I think you managed to answer. I know that some people had submitted some questions in advance, but I think you've been able to answer most of them around either the online training and the what to do when technology maybe doesn't quite go with the flow. But maybe we could just close if you had any final, I don't know, one kind of final key piece of advice that you think is your most important top tip as people look at using online platforms. I don't know, out of all the different expertise that you've shared this afternoon, whether there's a couple of things be like, yeah, this is the most important.
Because I'm into communication, I think it's all about just imagine how you come across. What is your style of communication when you're using these things? Because people are so focused on the content, what they want to deliver, and that makes such a big difference. What do you sound like? How do you come across? Are you open and friendly? Do you sound a little bit aggressive because you're such a panic to get everything done? Because that makes, that really impacts on people and how willing they are to listen to you again.
Great. Thank you. Well, we've had some thank you comments coming through. Lots of people saying thanks for sharing all your tips and knowledge, and it would all been really useful. So thank you very much, Jackie. As I mentioned, everybody, we will be sharing the slides so you can look back at them, and then Jackie's contact details are here, and we'll share them. So if you do want to find out more, then please do feel free, absolutely, to get in touch with Jackie directly. But thank you to all of you for dialing in today, and Jackie, a big thank you for you for presenting and sharing all of this knowledge. And I hope that it might inspire some of you who haven't done anything online yet, that you will be more confident about either starting or more confident in your use of these different systems as you go forward. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Maggie. It's great.
Thanks, Jackie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.